3ds Max has a number of different ways to navigate a scene within a viewport. We can use what's called the view cube, we can use what's called a steering wheel, we can use icons on the interface itself, or we can use just the mouse. So let's go through all of the different ways that we can navigate. Now, probably the most apparent way to navigate is this object here, and this is called the view cube. Now, if we just left-click over this and drag, you can see how we can orbit our view in the scene, or we can get more specific. So if we click on one of these front-facing ones, such as left, we can get a left view. If I click up here, I can get a top view. If I click over here, I can get a front view. And again, I can left-click and drag anywhere over that to orbit to wherever I want. If I want a more specific angular view, I can click on the top corners to get 3/4 views, or I can click on the corners to get more angular views. And again, I can middle click and drag. I also have a home key here, which will kind of zoom and give me a default view of this. Now, another way to navigate is to use what are called steering wheels. Now, we can get to the steering wheel by hovering over a viewport and doing Shift W, and it brings up this interface here. Now, what we can do is just hover over the function that we want. So if we want to hover over pan, we can pan the object. If we want to zoom, we can zoom. If we want to orbit, we can orbit. And again, if we hit rewind here, it'll give us all the previous views. And we can also close this. Now, another way is to use all of these controls down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the interface. So we have a zoom command here. All I have to do is highlight that, left-click and drag. We also have a zoom all. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go maximize viewport, which is the bottom right-hand corner. And that gives me all of my different viewports. So if I want to, I can zoom all of my viewports in and out, which is kind of nice. I can also do what's called zoom extents on the selected viewport. So in this case, the perspective is highlighted. If I do zoom extents, it will zoom so that everything in the scene is within that viewport. Now, some of these actually have flyouts here. So if I left click and drag, you can say to zoom selected, which will only zoom to those things that are selected. And again, we can do a zoom extents on all of our windows as well. Now, as we've seen before, this one here will maximize or minimize a viewport. And if we want to, we can again zoom in here. Now, another one we can change is the actual field of view. Now, this is how the camera actually works. It's more like a zoom control on the camera. So this really just lengthens or widens the lens of the camera. It doesn't physically move it. And then we have our standard pan as well as orbit, and I can orbit my view. Now, both of these have flyouts here, so I have a pan as well as a walkthrough. And for orbit, we can orbit our center of interest, extents of the scene, the selected objects, and so on. I tend to leave it on center of interest, which means that wherever I click, it will orbit. So if I click over here, it orbits here, and so on. Now, finally, we can also navigate using the mouse, and this will probably be the most common way. And the mouse navigation is really fairly simple. It's a combination of the Alt key and the middle mouse wheel. Now, make sure that you have a mouse that has a wheel on the middle, and most of them do. But all we have to do is just middle click and drag, and we can pan. If we roll the wheel, it will zoom or dolly the camera. And then if we hold down the Alt key, we can orbit. And again, wherever we have the mouse is where it will orbit. So notice that little green dot here is what it's orbiting around. So if I click here, we'll orbit around the center of the table. If I click here, we orbit around that center. So as you can see, there's a number of different ways to navigate within 3ds Max. So just to review, we have the view cube, which is in the interface. We have the steering wheel, which we can get by using Shift W. We can also use the icons on the screen or just the mouse by itself.